Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. We're taking a really fascinating look at the mechanics of universal consciousness, and more specifically, the actual literal mechanics of chanting. We're drawing from a deeply profound source text that looks at ancient spiritual practices not just as religious rituals, but as a literal kind of spiritual physics. We're going to break down how the individual mind connects to the universal whole, what happens when that connection breaks, and how the ancient science of mantras provides a very specific energetic framework for rebuilding it. So if you've ever wondered how repetitive sound is supposed to actually change your reality, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get right into it. Our source text immediately sets the stage with this incredibly profound premise. Knowledge without action is lifeless. Action without knowledge is blind. Think about that for a second. We so often treat spiritual learning or philosophical understanding as the finish line, right? But this text argues that just understanding a concept intellectually is completely lifeless if it isn't paired with physical, rigorous action. And on the flip side, just going through the motions of a ritual without deeply understanding the philosophy behind it, well, that's like walking with your eyes closed. You absolutely need both engines running to actually move forward. So let's jump into our first major theme, faith and spiritual practice.
Okay, let's dive into this and see how we actually balance those two engines. The source material divides our spiritual framework into two parts, asta and sadhana. Now, asta is your faith and your knowledge. It's the ethics, the philosophy, your deep inner world, and how you understand the subtle universe. It's the knowledge side of the equation. But then you have sadhana, which is all about practice and action. We're talking restraint, taking vows, and doing very specific spiritual exercises. The text makes it absolutely crystal clear that these two are a package deal. They literally cannot exist without each other. Asta without sadhana, just empty philosophy. Sadhana without asta, just a mechanical, mindless routine. To get to any real spiritual realization, that philosophical groundwork has to be activated by mandatory, disciplined action.
Moving right along to Section 2, the disconnected consciousness.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when things go awry, what happens when we neglect that practice. The text uses three highly visceral metaphors to describe an individual mind that has been completely severed from universal consciousness. First, imagine a disconnected wire. The powerhouse is buzzing with electricity, the light bulb in your room is totally fine, but because the wire between them is snapped, the room stays entirely dark. Second, think of a blocked stream. If a massive boulder blocks the flow, the water just diverts somewhere else, and the land that actually needed it dries up and dies. Finally, a separated cloud. A cloud only holds rain because it pulls moisture from the ocean, right? If it loses that connection to the ocean, it doesn't just stop raining. It ceases to exist altogether and just dissipates into dust. And that is exactly what happens to us when our internal connection to the universal whole gets blocked. We lose our power, our nourishment, and our true essence.
Which brings us to this incredibly stark, powerful metaphor straight from the text. When a human being is entirely disconnected from their spiritual magnitude, they're described as being, quote, like the severed tail of a lizard, twitching wildly. It's a pretty somber image, honestly. When we live solely for our physical bodies, when we're just existing to consume and survive without any higher connection, we are quite literally just animated matter. We're jumping around, burning energy, twitching wildly through our day-to-day routines, but we're completely devoid of the divine consciousness that actually gives life its meaning and direction.
That takes us to Section 3, nourishing the soul.
So if we're just out here acting like twitching, disconnected tails, what are we actually starving ourselves of? The text points out this kind of tragic irony about human existence. We work so incredibly hard to make sure our physical body gets food, water, and shelter. We keep the body moving. But our inner consciousness, our soul, needs a totally different kind of fuel. Just like a newborn baby depends entirely on its mother's milk to survive and grow, our soul relies absolutely on maintaining a dynamic link with the divine universal consciousness. Without that direct line, the inner consciousness literally starves. It gets weak, suppressed, and basically goes dormant, even if your physical body looks completely healthy on the outside.
All right, moving into Section 4, re-establishing the link.
It's the ultimate question, isn't it? If the wire to the powerhouse is broken, how exactly do we splice it back together? What's the actual practical mechanism for rebuilding this spiritual connection?
Well, the answer here really defies conventional academic thinking. The text explicitly states that intellectual knowledge, philosophy, and just reading scripture are simply not enough to build true soul power. You could be the most brilliant scholar in the world. You could have memorized all the Vedanta philosophy there is. People could revere you for your massive intellect. But being a scholar does not generate the energetic force required to reconnect that wire. To forge that spiritual link, ritualistic action, sadhana, is absolutely required. You have to actually do the work.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, the science of mantra.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how the text completely redefines what a mantra actually is. We normally think of a mantra as just a set of words, maybe a positive affirmation you repeat in the mirror. But our source text defines a mantra as a highly specific, physical manifestation of sound. It is not arbitrary, it has to be sequential, it has to be highly rhythmic, and most importantly, through continuous repetition, that sound must become circular. It's an active physical manipulation of acoustic energy.
And here is the exact step-by-step process of how this energy gathers. Step 1 is the rhythmic chanting of a specific sequence of syllables. You're maintaining the exact same tone, pace, and rhythm. Step 2 is where the physics actually shift. By flawlessly repeating this sound over and over, the sound waves stop traveling in a straight linear line and they begin to form a continuous, rapid, circular motion. It's a lot like acoustic resonance in physics, where trapped sound waves multiply their own force. And then step 3 is the payoff. This rapid, circular momentum of sound begins to generate an extraordinary, highly concentrated energy. It totally stops being just words, and it becomes this intense, dynamic vortex of force. Let's move to and see how this builds, using a really brilliant analogy from the text to help visualize this energetic shift. Picture a simple stone. If it's just sitting there on the ground, it's static, it's localized, and it has zero power. But if you tie that exact same stone to a piece of string and start spinning it rapidly around your hand, two crazy things happen. First, the stone and the string blur together and create the visual illusion of a solid circle. Second, it generates immense kinetic force. If you release that string, that harmless little stone shoots forward like a lethal arrow, covering massive distances. The text argues that a single spoken word is like the static stone, but a mantra, rhythmically repeated over and over, that is the stone spun on a string. It creates a powerful, dynamic force out of something completely ordinary.
And this brings us to the ultimate conclusion of our source's technical breakdown. The generation of this extraordinary energy through circular sound waves is exactly what reconnects the wire to the powerhouse. This energetic flow doesn't just stay trapped inside your head. It creates this miraculous flow of power that actively impacts both your inner physical body, feeding that starved consciousness we talked about earlier, and it reaches out to influence the outer cosmic universe. This, according to the text, is the true, scientifically grounded magic of a mantra. It's the actual physical action required to activate your spiritual knowledge.
So I want to leave you with this final, really vital thought. We've just seen how the disciplined, rhythmic repetition of sound can generate immense spiritual and physical power, bridging the massive gap between the individual and the universe. But think about it. Every single day, we all have a constant stream of repetitive thoughts and words looping in our heads. If repetitive sound and thought can quite literally alter the physics of your inner universe, what words are you spinning on a string in your own mind? Are they generating the power to connect you to the universe, or are they keeping you entirely in the dark? Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and keep exploring.